Well, it's very, very nearly a done deal. Government and public sector unions pretty much signing now, almost signing, a 2-year wage deal, a 7.5% increase, significantly higher than the 4.7% that the finance minister penciled in for his budget. At the same time, while 53% of the public service unions are very likely to accept now, not all unions are happy. What does this all mean, given that there's a public service coordinating bargaining council? Let's speak now to Labour analyst Terry Bell. Terry, thanks so much for joining us. Of course, the news came in just a couple of hours ago that the largest public sector union, Public Servants Association, has said, we have accepted this deal. What does it mean for the other unions? Do we have any insight into where they're at in their process?
Well, all the unions that were involved in the discussions from the 17th of February, and that includes, incidentally, the largest teacher union, which is the South African Democratic Teachers Union, which is COSATU affiliated, have all agreed to the deal. And in fact, the final draft, these things get drafted and redrafted, went out this afternoon. I know that the PSA and the other federation of unions, fiduciary unions, will probably sign tonight. I mean, as we're speaking, they're probably signing it. And then tomorrow morning, SADTU will sign, which brings it up to just under 54%. Now, the rule within the bargaining council, quite simply, is that if a majority of members of unions, no matter a simple majority, can be 51% or 50.1%, sign and agree to a deal, it is binding on all the other unions. This is what happened in 2018 when the government insisted on a 3-year deal, which the unions did not want. But they finally managed to persuade the unions that are affiliated to the government, to COSATU unions affiliated to the ANC, to agree to it. And at the end of the day, just over 50% agreed. The PSA disagreed, refused to sign, but nonetheless had still to accept it because they were in the minority. That's the way it works. It's a majoritarian situation, and it's the only way I think that you possibly can work if you're going to have a bargaining council.
What are the benefits of a bargaining council? I'm thinking, do we know if any unions are going to be very unhappy? I'm thinking, of course, of Nahawu, who's already walked away from this process once.
Well, Nahawu has already said yesterday, their spokesperson said, we're not going to accept this because until we've sorted out what happened last year, we're not going to deal with this year's wage deal. But last year's already, yes, a terrible done deal, and the government is responsible. They arbitrarily imposed a 3% wage deal on the public sector. Now, that completely undermined the whole concept of the bargaining council, of collective bargaining, the whole works. The government set the groundwork, if you will, for that sort of behavior. A strike was called and actually set up and properly announced by the Public Service Association, the PSA. But they went on strike, a 1-day strike, but the other unions didn't, because what complicated things then, of course, you have inter-union rivalry.
Yeah.
But the government set the work for it in the first place. Now what Nahawu is saying is, well, they've done it before, we're going to do it. I mean, we're not really school kids running around a playground fighting with one another. It's much more important. It's time they got down and said either we accept collective bargaining through a bargaining council, or else we can go back to the old anarchy, if you will, as happened in 73, where employers finally said, look, we're sick and tired of this. We've got to have some sort of council. We've got to have unions because we're sick and tired of dealing with anonymous phone calls from ticky boxes.
I want to ask you a little bit more about the government's role in terms of the trust deficit in just a moment. But I want to get to an understanding of collective bargaining. I would imagine it's about power and strength in numbers. But if you have this inter-union rivalry, if you have unions going, I don't care if we're in the minority, we don't agree, is it really worth it to have collective bargaining? I mean, is it still a useful vehicle in South Africa, in your view?
I can't see what else you can do. I mean, the point, what our problem here is that the complication has been from way back, has been the idea of one of the major federations being affiliated to the governing party, which happens to be the largest employer in the land. You can go back to 1991 when there was the first COSATU Congress in South Africa, where you actually had an appeal to say, look, ANC is going to become government. They'll become the biggest employer. We cannot, therefore, still remain in any sort of alliance with them. That was actually put, incidentally, by the Metalworkers Union, and it was lost. And then in 1996, all the unions came together with a macroeconomic policy, not frightfully revolutionary, but a good social democratic policy, which they put forward together. It was ignored by the government that came up with what the unions immediately called a neoliberal mishmash, and which some of the economists said was just a cascade of improbabilities. And away they went. And from then on, the unions remained split, divided. Union solidarity and unity ceased to exist. And unfortunately, it still has to be rebuilt.
I want to speak to you now about the trust issue, because as you mentioned, the 3% increase was just imposed last year. Before that, the third year of the 3-year wage deal was reneged upon by government. Is there trust now that government will stick to the second year of this wage deal? I mean, how much has been repaired in terms of that trust deficit between government and the unions?
Virtually none. And I think that's one of the reasons within NEHA where they feel we played ball with our partners in this alliance. And look what they did to us. In the first place, they reneged on the third deal, which was a totally gross breach of contract. Wouldn't have worked in the private sector, but they managed to get away with it on a technicality that the management hadn't spoken to the Treasury, etc. Doesn't matter. The point was that caused an incredible amount of tension, an incredible amount of bitterness. And then to, on top of that, impose arbitrarily a 3% wage deal. Yes, I think the trust deficit the government faces now is extraordinary. And I think one of the reasons that they quickly upped from 4.5 to, well, from 3 originally to 4.5 and then up to 7.5 is quite honestly because there's an election coming.
Thank you so much. Always great to chat to you. Labour analyst Terry Bowell.